A golden life. My name's Gus and I've landed in canine paradise. Forget endless treats or diamond-studded collars, my bliss is all about Bob and Mary. They're my people and I couldn't have handpicked better ones myself. Bob's a gentle giant with a booming laugh, a sound like thunder rumbling on the horizon. Mary? She's pure, distilled sunshine. Her smile could thaw the Arctic and her touch is always tender when she finds that sweet spot behind my ears. Our home, a cozy cottage painted a cheerful yellow, a hue Bob chose because, as he tells it, it mirrored Mary's hair back when their story began. The air inside is thick with the aroma of Mary's baked goods and the familiar comfort of Bob's pipe tobacco. But before, getting around wasn't easy. Mary uses a wheelchair, a sleek cobalt blue machine she bears with quiet strength. Though outwardly accepting, I notice the faint crease in her brow as she maneuvers toward the porch's single step. I catch the slight hitch in her breath when Bob has to lift her, chair and all, over the obstacle. A soft whine escapes me, a furry offering of comfort, and she'll reward me with a pat, calling me her good boy. But I see it. Bob did too. For months, he talked about building a ramp, disappearing into the garage to sketch on scrapwood, murmuring about angles and load-bearing. Mary would watch him from the doorway, her expression a blend of eagerness and apprehension. I'd stay close, a warm, grounding presence amidst her swirling emotions. Then, one Saturday, before the sun fully colored the sky, Bob began. The clang of tools and the steady beat of hammer-on would fill the early morning air. Mary was already at the window, a silent observer. I nudged her hand, offering a sloppy, encouraging lick. All day Bob toiled. Sweat glistened on his brow, and a string of muttered words filled the air, carefully muffled so Mary wouldn't hear, but he never faltered. He measured, sawed, hammered, the ramp slowly emerging like a sculpture from raw materials. I remained Mary's shadow, occasionally dashing out to lick Bob's calloused hand or chase away a particularly bold squirrel. By late afternoon, near completion, Bob added the finishing touches, a sturdy handrail painted the same joyful yellow as the house and a textured surface to prevent any slips. He stepped back, wiping his forehead with a bandana and surveyed his creation. Mary guided her wheelchair onto the porch. Her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. Bob held his breath as she approached the incline. With deliberate care, she rolled onto the ramp. My tail became a blur of happy energy as she ascended smoothly, reaching the top with ease. She turned to Bob, her smile radiant. "It's perfect, Bob," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." A wide grin split Bob's face. He knelt, enfolding her, wheelchair and all, in a loving embrace. I leaped forward, planting my paws on their laps, joining the happy huddle. That evening, after supper, Mary wheeled herself onto the porch to witness the sunset. Bob sat beside her, hand clasped in hers. I rested at their feet, my head nestled on Mary's leg. The air hummed with the fragrance of honeysuckle and the chorus of crickets. As the last golden light faded, painting the heavens in vibrant hues, Mary turned to Bob, whispering, "Thank you for everything." Bob squeezed her hand in reply. "Anything for you, sunshine," he murmured. "Anything." I knew then that my paradise had just become even more brilliant. The ramp was more than just lumber and nails. It represented liberation, self-reliance, and love given physical form. And I, Gus, was privileged to bear witness. I licked Mary's hand, conveying my understanding. "I always understand. It's the essence of being a good dog, a devoted companion. I am the best dog." Grumbles on the horizon. The sun, usually a balm to Bob's spirit, offered no comfort against the disquiet churning within him. A sleek black sedan purred to a halt, mirroring the low vibration of unease that rumbled in Gus's throat. From it emerged Bartholomew Bart Grumbles, a man whose very presence exuded disapproval. His impeccably tailored gray suit seemed to leach the vibrancy from the air itself. Even the meticulously kept lawn across the street appeared to shrink under his scrutiny. Bob fought down a sigh. "Here we go." Gus, as though tethered to Bob's anxiety, pressed against his leg, a comforting weight. "Just be reasonable," Mary murmured, squeezing his hand. "Explain it calmly." Grumbles adjusted his tie with a sharp, almost aggressive tug. Ignoring Bob and Mary, he commenced his inspection of the ramp, circling it like a hawk eyeing its prey. The tap of his flawlessly polished shoes on the pavement sounded like miniature gavels, each strike amplifying Bob's apprehension. Finally, he halted, his expression settling into a mask of practiced disdain. "This," he began, his voice a gravelly monotone, "is simply unacceptable." Bob inhaled deeply. Mr. Grumbles, thank you for coming. As you can see, the ramp is essential for Mary's mobility. Grumbles waved a dismissive hand, the gesture conveying volumes of condescension. Necessity is immaterial. The issue, Mr. He paused, peering at Bob as if he were a particularly unpleasant specimen under a microscope. Johnson is the blatant contravention of Architectural Standard 3. 2b, subsection gamma, concerning exterior color schemes. Bob's brow furrowed. The color. Precisely. This salmon excrescence assaults the sensibilities of our community. We cultivate understated elegance here, Mr. Johnson, not a seaside resort. Mary's grip tightened reassuringly on Bob's hand. It's more of a coral, actually, she interjected with a gentle smile. Grumbles remained deaf to her remark. The approved palette, which I trust you consulted upon taking residence, explicitly mandates earth tones. Beige, taupe, perhaps a muted sage. Not this. A visible shudder racked his frame as if the ramp inflicted actual discomfort. Bob struggled to maintain composure. Mr. Grumbles, with respect, the hue was a secondary concern. We required a ramp urgently to ensure Mary could safely access her home. We opted for a shade that was readily available and weather-resistant. Practicality pales in comparison to adherence to established norms, Grumbles retorted, his voice sharp. He produced a small electronic device, tapping its surface with a focused frown. Let me consult the records. Ah, yes. No application for structural alteration was filed. No dispensation sought. This was erected without sanction. Sensing the rising tension, Gus emitted a low growl, directed pointedly at Grumbles. Silence that animal, Grumbles snapped, not deigning to look at Gus. His gaze remained fixed on Bob, glacial and unwavering. You have 30 days to bring this abomination into compliance. Failure to do so will incur escalating penalties, ultimately culminating in legal action. With a rigid turn, he marched back to his sedan, the crunch of gravel under his immaculate shoes punctuating his departure. The car door slammed, the sound echoing in the sudden vacuum he left behind. Bob watched him drive off, the knot in his stomach cinching tighter. He glanced at Mary, whose face betrayed a mixture of exasperation and worry. He looked at Gus, now whimpering softly, sensing the disruption in their normally peaceful existence. Well, Mary said, her voice strained. That was productive. Bob exhaled wearily. This is just the opening act, isn't it? The notice. The crisp white envelope felt heavy in Bob's hand. It bore the embossed seal of the Homeowners Association, a stylized oak tree whose roots seemed to strangle the ground beneath it. He recognized the font, a severe, unwavering Times New Roman, from previous missives about unkempt lawns and the unacceptable shade of beige his mailbox had been painted years ago. This felt different, colder. He ripped it open with a frustrated sigh. The single sheet inside crackled like dried leaves. His eyes scanned the block of text, each word a tiny barb sinking into his soul. Mary, he said, his voice tight. He walked into the living room where Mary sat knitting, her brow furrowed in concentration as she navigated a particularly intricate cable stitch. Gus, sensing the shift in atmosphere, abandoned his chew toy and sat at Mary's feet, his ears perked. What is it, Bob? Mary asked, her hands still. He held up the notice, his hand trembling slightly. It's from Grumbles. The HOA. About the ramp. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud, each sentence delivered with a simmering resentment. Notice of violation, architectural noncompliance. It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that an unapproved modification has been made to the property located at 14 Oakview Lane. Specifically, the construction of a wooden ramp extending from the front porch constitutes a violation of Article 7, Section 3, Paragraph B of the HOA bylaws, pertaining to alterations of exterior structures without prior written approval. Furthermore, the aforementioned ramp is deemed to be aesthetically incongruous with the established architectural standards of the Oakview Estates community. He paused, his jaw clenched. Mary's knitting needles clicked once, then fell silent in her lap. Gus whined softly, nudging her hand with his wet nose. Bob continued, his voice rising in pitch. The homeowner is hereby instructed to either modify the ramp to comply with the approved architectural guidelines or to remove the structure entirely within 30 days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in further action, including but not limited to fines, legal action, and forced removal of the offending structure at the homeowner's expense. He crumpled the paper in his fist. That miserable, heartless. He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. Mary hated it when he swore. Mary reached out, her hand finding his. Her touch was surprisingly firm. Show me. He smoothed out the crumpled notice and handed it to her. She read it slowly, her lips moving silently as she deciphered each word. Her face remained impassive, betraying none of the turmoil he knew she must be feeling. 30 days, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. 30 days to tear down the ramp, the thing that gives you your freedom? Bob exploded. Or to make it, what? Invisible? Camouflaged to look like a rosebush. He paced the room, his frustration bubbling over. This is unbelievable. He saw you struggling. He knows why we built it. It's not like we're building a freaking water slide. It's a ramp. Gus, sensing the tension escalating, moved closer to Mary, pressing his body against her leg. She stroked his head absently, her gaze fixed on the crumpled notice in her lap. Bob stopped pacing and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. We'll fight this, Mary. I promise you. We'll get a lawyer. We'll appeal. We'll chain ourselves to the ramp if we have to. Mary finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. They were filled with a weariness that cut him to the core. It's just exhausting, Bob. Fighting all the time. I just want to knit and watch the birds and not worry about some ridiculous HOA rule. Gus licked her hand, his tail thumping softly against the carpet. Bob wrapped his arms around both Mary and Gus, holding them close. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I know. But we'll get through this. Together. We always do. He wasn't sure if he believed his own words. The weight of the notice, the sheer, unyielding force of Bartholomew Grumble's disapproval felt heavier than anything he had faced before. This wasn't just about a ramp, it was about their lives, their peace, their freedom. And he knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. Chainsaw calamity. The whine started low, a mosquito in the distance growing quickly into a hornet. Mary looked up from her gardening, trowel clattering against the terracotta pot. A cherry-red pickup, the kind favored by construction workers, idled at the curb. 3 men unfolded from the cab like contortionists, clad in hard hats and high-visibility vests that screamed official business. Gus, sensing the shift in Mary's posture, pressed against her leg, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. He hated the noise of engines, the smell of exhaust. Can I help you, gentlemen? Mary called out, wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. The lead man, barrel-chested with a walrus mustache, consulted a clipboard. Grumble's residence? Wheelchair ramp on the property. Mary's stomach clenched. Yes. Is there a problem? We have an order to dismantle it. He gestured to his crew, who began unloading their equipment, sawhorses, sledgehammers, and a chainsaw that looked like it could fell a redwood. Dismantle it? You can't be serious. This is how I get in and out of my house. Mary pushed her wheelchair forward, her voice rising in alarm. Orders are orders, ma'am. The man shrugged, a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and indifferent. Architectural standards violation. Mr. Bartholomew Grumbles himself signed off on it. Gus, now fully alert, launched into a frenzy of barking, a furious torrent of sound directed at the men. He lunged at the lead man's boots, nipping at his heels. Gus! Down! No! Mary commanded, her voice sharp. Gus, ears flattened, reluctantly retreated to her side, but continued to growl, a low, guttural warning. Look, Mary pleaded, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. This ramp was built to code. We had permits. I can show you the paperwork. The lead man shook his head, his expression unchanging. Doesn't matter, ma'am. We're just here to do a job. Mr. Grumbles said it's gotta go. He pulled the starter cord on the chainsaw. The engine roared to life, a high-pitched, metallic shriek that drowned out Mary's protests and sent shivers down Gus's spine. Mary watched, helpless, as the crew moved towards the ramp. The chainsaw operator, a skinny kid with acne, revved the engine again, sending a plume of sawdust into the air. The first cut was brutal, a jagged gash tearing through the treated lumber. Gus barked and howled, a desperate lament that echoed through the neighborhood. Mary, her hands trembling, wheeled closer, desperately searching for a way to stop them. The wood splintered and cracked, the ramp groaning under the assault. From across the street, Mrs. Henderson emerged from her house, clutching her cat. She stared, her mouth agape, but quickly retreated back inside, pulling the curtains shut. The lead man approached Mary, his voice surprisingly gentle amidst the mechanical carnage. Look, ma'am, I understand this is upsetting. But we're just doing our job. Maybe you should call Mr. Grumbles. Try and talk some sense into him. Mary's eyes narrowed. I intend to do exactly that. The chainsaw screamed again, ripping another section of the ramp apart. Gus, beside himself with frustration, strained against his leash, desperate to defend his home, his mistress. The air filled with the acrid smell of sawdust and the bitter taste of defeat. Mary watched, her heart sinking with each splintered board as her lifeline to the outside world was systematically destroyed. The sun beat down on her, unforgiving, and the whine of the chainsaw felt like a personal violation, a cruel and unnecessary assault. The destruction continued, inch by agonizing inch. Gus to the rescue. The shift hit Gus like a physical blow the instant those heavy boots scraped against the welcome mat. He flattened himself against the cabinet, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Not Bob's worn work boots. These reeked of an alien presence, acrid coffee mingled with cloying cologne, an offensive cocktail that raised the hackles on his back. He spied the boots moving past the kitchen entrance, followed by the gravelly rasp of unfamiliar voices, a jarring chorus of ill intent. A cold dread, deeper than any he'd known, settled in his gut. Sarah was in danger. The unwelcome weight on his collar eased as the intruders continued their advance. Opportunity. A coiled spring, he unleashed himself with a sudden surge, twisting until he was free. He darted past a carelessly discarded toolbox, a blur of fur, and slipped through the doorway before they could react. Freedom. The rush of cool air against his face carried the welcome tang of pine and earth. No time to revel. He had a singular purpose, Bob. He plunged into the overgrown garden, heedless of the thorny barbs snagging his fur as he scrambled toward the sidewalk. The familiar neighborhood swam into view, a tableau of pristine lawns and rotating sprinklers. He tore down the pavement, his paws a frantic drumbeat against the concrete, shattering the suburban serenity. The houses, usually havens of peace, now felt like impediments, their tidy facades a cruel mockery of his urgent mission. Cutting across Mrs. Henderson's prized rose bushes, he left a trail of scattered petals and broken stems in his wake. A quick glance back revealed no pursuit. Still, he pressed on. Sarah's image burned in his mind, her face ashen, her eyes wide with alarm. The vision spurred him onward, pushing his weary muscles to their limit. Reaching the main thoroughfare, the cacophony of traffic assaulted his ears. He dodged, weaving through the metal behemoths, ignoring the angry horns that blared his disruption. He knew this path intimately. He trod it countless times with Bob. Bob's office lay just beyond. Finally, he spotted it. Bob's shingle, a modest rectangle proclaiming, Robert Miller, building code consultant. Relief washed over him, a brief respite from the gnawing worry. He sprinted the remaining distance, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. He arrived at the office, a humble structure wedged between a bakery and a dry cleaner. He scratched desperately at the door, whimpering, barking, a frantic plea for entry. The tiny bell above the door jingled, a plaintive sound lost in the din. A woman adorned with fiery red lipstick and an impossibly tight bun cracked the door open. Scram. Get lost. We don't allow animals here. He ignored her pronouncement, throwing his weight against the barrier. He barked again, a sharp, insistent sound that pierced the noise. He caught sight of Bob inside, hunched over a desk buried beneath paperwork. Redoubling his efforts, he whined, scratched, and hurled himself against the door until the woman, defeated, grudgingly widened the opening. He squeezed through the space and launched himself at Bob, barking madly, leaping and nipping at his hands. Bob looked up, startled by the onslaught. Gus, what's gotten into you? Are you okay, boy? He reached to soothe Gus, but Gus resisted. He tugged insistently at Bob's sleeve, urging him toward the door, a barrage of frantic barks erupting from his throat. What is it, Gus? What's wrong? Bob's brow furrowed with concern. He knew Gus, this behavior was abnormal. It was more than just a simple craving for a walk. Gus barked again, a desperate, pleading sound. He darted to the door, then back to Bob, enacting the same frantic charade. He had to make Bob understand. He needed him to come home. The woman with the vibrant lipstick observed the scene with mounting curiosity. Mr. Miller, is everything all right? He seems very agitated. Bob glanced from Gus to the woman, then back again. He knelt, meeting Gus's gaze. Something's wrong, isn't it, boy? Something's happened back at the house. Gus barked once, a sharp, affirmative response. Fear flickered across Bob's features. He rose abruptly, sending a stack of papers tumbling to the floor. I have to go. Right now. He snatched his jacket and hurried past the woman, his face etched with worry. Call my wife, Sarah. If she doesn't answer, call the police. He followed Gus out the door, his pace quickening. Lead the way, boy. Show me what's happening. Gus barked, a relieved and urgent sound combined. He spun around and bolted, his tail wagging with renewed purpose. Bob was coming. He was on his way home. The director arrives. Gus vibrated with nervous energy, snagging Bob's sleeve, his gaze flickering between his friend and the street ahead. "Bob, come on, you won't believe it." "Mary, the ramp," words choked in his throat, a garbled mess of distress. Dread coiled in Bob's stomach. He accelerated, Gus practically scampering to keep pace. Rounding the corner, devastation assaulted his senses. His ramp was gone, reduced to a wreckage of splintered timber scattered like unwanted firewood across the lawn. Bright yellow tape, a mocking barrier, rippled in the breeze, encircling the destruction. On the porch swing, Mary's frame convulsed with sobs, her face hidden in her hands. Bob sprinted forward. "Mary, what happened?" She lifted a tear-streaked face, eyes puffy and raw. They tore it down, Bob. Said it didn't meet code." He knelt, clasping her hand, finding her fingers like ice. "Who, Mary? Who did this?" A trembling finger pointed to a ramrod-straight figure posed on their yard, hands clasped formally behind his back, surveying the carnage with pursed lips. "Mr. Grumbles." A slow burn of rage ignited within Bob. He marched towards the man, each crunch of shattered wood underfoot a jarring contrast to the cheerful birdsong. "Grumbles, what in the world have you done?" Grumbles remained unmoved. He pivoted, his gaze unwavering, jaw set like stone. "Mr. Peterson, I assume you've observed the architectural irregularities. The ramp constituted a clear breach of HOA Bylaw 37, subsection C, concerning unauthorized exterior property alterations." "Irregularities?" "Mary needs that ramp. She has mobility issues." Bob's voice escalated, echoing in the manicured stillness. "The board attempted to communicate the necessity of permits and architectural schematics, Mr. Peterson. Your lack of response forced our hand." Grumble's voice was a monotone, each syllable a precisely delivered accusation. Bob struggled to master his fury. "So, your solution? Demolishing a disability access ramp? Couldn't you have waited? Shown an ounce of compassion?" Grumble's lips compressed into a thin line. "Sentimentality is extraneous to maintaining community standards, Mr. Peterson. Neighborhood aesthetics are paramount. We have a reputation to uphold." "A reputation for callousness? Inhumanity?" Bob advanced, his shadow encroaching on Grumbles. "Do you grasp the ramifications of your actions? The significance to her?" He indicated Mary, still slumped on the swing, tears carving tracks through her makeup. Grumbles remained impervious. "The board will offer a nominal sum to defray the removal costs." Something snapped deep inside Bob. The endless bureaucracy, the petty regulations, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of this man, it all converged into a focused, icy anger. Drawing himself up to his full stature, his voice dropped to a dangerously even keel. "You know, Mr. Grumbles," he began, his gaze locking with Grumbles. "I've reached my limit with this HOA charade. Enough of your trivial rules and utter lack of empathy." He paused, inhaling deeply. He reached for his wallet, flicking it open to reveal the identification card within. "Perhaps you should be aware of whom you're addressing. Bartholomew Grumbles, allow me to introduce Robert Peterson, State Building Code Director." All color leached from Grumbles' face. His painstakingly assembled composure shattered like the ramp itself. His mouth worked soundlessly, a fish gasping for air. The identification card trembled almost imperceptibly in Bob's grasp, a small square of authority against Grumbles' stunned silence. Bob snapped the wallet shut, returning it to his pocket. "Now about that illegally demolished ramp. The mayor's decree." Bart Grumble's face, already a roadmap of wrinkles carved by disapproval, tightened further. "Misunderstanding? I assure you, there's been no misunderstanding. The ramp violates several architectural covenants clearly outlined in the homeowner's agreement. Its removal was entirely within my purview." He puffed out his chest, the brass buttons on his navy blazer gleaming obnoxiously in the afternoon sun. Bob's hands clenched into fists. Mary squeezed his arm, her face pale but resolute. "It's not a violation, Mr. Grumbles. It's a necessity. My wife needs it to get in and out of our home." "Necessity doesn't supersede the rules," Grumbles snapped, adjusting his spectacles. He gestured towards the flattened patch of earth where the ramp had been. That monstrosity was an eyesore, a blight on the aesthetic harmony of Willow Creek Estates. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, some nodding in agreement with Grumbles, others shooting him disapproving glances. A plump woman with curlers in her hair whispered loudly to her neighbor, "He's gone too far this time. Poor Mary." Grumbles, oblivious or uncaring, continued his tirade. "I'm simply upholding the standards that keep this community desirable. Allowing exceptions would set a dangerous precedent. Soon, Everyone will be building whatever they please, and Willow Creek will become a shantytown. He sputtered, his face turning a shade of purple that rivaled the azaleas blooming in Mrs. Henderson's yard. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. A dark blue sedan, its paint gleaming like a freshly polished sapphire, had pulled up to the curb. From the driver's seat emerged a woman, her silver hair impeccably coiffed, her demeanor radiating authority. It was Mayor Thompson. She surveyed the scene, her gaze sweeping over the demolished ramp, the agitated faces, and finally settling on Grumbles, who seemed to deflate slightly under her scrutiny. What in heaven's name is going on here? Bartholomew. Her voice, though calm, held an edge of steel. Grumbles, attempting a weak smile, stammered, "Mayor Thompson. A minor infraction, that's all. Just enforcing community standards." He gestured vaguely at the destroyed ramp. An unauthorized structure. The mayor's eyes narrowed. She walked towards Mary, her expression softening. "Mary, are you all right? What happened here?" Mary, her voice trembling slightly, explained the situation, detailing Grumble's actions and his refusal to listen to reason. Bob stood beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Grumbles with barely suppressed fury. The mayor listened intently, her expression growing darker with each word. When Mary finished, she turned to Grumbles, her voice now laced with icy fury. "Bartholomew, I am appalled. Utterly appalled. You removed a ramp built for a disabled resident? On what grounds?" Grumbles, his face now a pasty white, tried to backpedal. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Mayor. I wasn't aware of the medical necessity." He coughed nervously. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately?" "There's nothing to discuss privately," the mayor snapped, her voice echoing across the manicured lawns. "This is a matter of public record now, and my decree is this. Bartholomew Grumbles, you will personally oversee the immediate reconstruction of this ramp, and you will do it to code, ensuring it meets all safety standards. Furthermore, you will publicly apologize to Mary and Bob for your egregious behavior. Is that understood?" Grumbles, defeated, mumbled a barely audible, "Yes, Mayor." The mayor fixed him with a stern look. "I want to see progress on this by tomorrow morning, and I expect that apology to be sincere. This community prides itself on its compassion and inclusivity, not on petty, heartless enforcement of arbitrary rules." She turned back to Mary and Bob, offering them a reassuring smile. "I'll make sure this is taken care of. You have my word." As the mayor returned to her car, the crowd erupted in applause. Even the woman with the curlers gave Grumbles a withering look. He stood there, deflated and humiliated, the weight of the mayor's decree heavy on his shoulders. The afternoon sun, which had seemed so bright moments before, now cast long, accusing shadows across his face. A ramp rebuilt. Gus nodded his cuticles, wearing a track into the already thin lawn. The guttural growl of a delivery truck jolted him upright. His pulse quickened as a flatbed disgorged its cargo, stacks of fragrant lumber, hefty bags of concrete mix, and a power saw whose blade glinted with menacing promise. Bob, arms folded, gave the foreman a terse nod. Immediately, the crew, a picture of efficiency, sprang into action, their movements fluid and precise, the syncopated drumming of hammers a sharp contrast to the turmoil in Gus's mind. He imagined Mary, trapped inside, feeling like a burden. "They're really doing it," he muttered, half to himself. Bob overheard and gave him a hearty clap on the back. "Told you I'd handle it." He indicated the blueprints splayed across the truck's hood. "And this time every detail is above board. No arguments, no wiggle room." Relief washed over Gus, tempered by persistent unease. He trusted Bob's competence, but Mr. Grumbles. Mr. Grumbles was an unyielding force, powered by regulations and an insatiable need for control. The old ramp vanished with surprising swiftness, its decaying wood a grim reminder of substandard work. Gus cringed as they carted away the remnants. The foundation, a smooth, unblemished expanse of wet concrete, was poured. The frame rose quickly, plumb and true. In mere hours, the bare bones of the new ramp stood firm. Bob, an exacting overseer, scrutinized every angle, every measurement. He even used a digital level, verifying meticulous adherence to the rules. Gus watched, mesmerized, as Bob patiently explained the finer points of incline and handrail height to the foreman, who listened intently, nodding his understanding. This endeavor transcended mere construction, it was a statement. The following day, the ramp was decked and awaiting its finishing touches. Bob, wielding brushes and a tin of Mary's beloved periwinkle blue, surveyed their progress. Right then, Gus, he announced, offering him a smaller brush. Time to add some charm. Surprised, yet eager to help, Gus took the brush and began painting the trim. The color popped, a joyful spark against the beige monotony of the neighborhood. He lost himself in the rhythm of application, the tang of fresh paint oddly soothing. Suddenly, a choked gasp of outrage broke the spell. Gus looked up to see Mr. Grumbles, his face a rigid mask of censure, standing rigidly at the edge of the driveway. What is the meaning of this cerulean abomination? He sputtered, a trembling finger aimed at the ramp. Without hesitation, Bob approached Mr. Grumbles, brush extended. Mr. Grumbles, I believe you have some balusters to coat. Consider it community service. Court ordered. Mr. Grumbles sputtered again. But Bob's steady gaze and the looming presence of two burly construction workers seemed to sap his resistance. With a sigh that echoed with the weight of 1,000 ordinances, he grudgingly accepted the brush. He painted in silence, his movements stiff and awkward. Drops of periwinkle blue marred his immaculate loafers. He avoided all eye contact. Gus felt a pang of reluctant sympathy for the man, imprisoned by his own rigid principles. By late afternoon, the ramp stood complete. The periwinkle blue shimmered in the light of the setting sun. It was solid, compliant, and undeniably lovely. Gus guided Mary out onto the freshly built ramp. Her face blossomed with joy. It's perfect, she breathed, squeezing his hand. Turning to Bob, her eyes shone. Thank you. Bob simply smiled. My pleasure, Mary. Even Mr. Grumbles, lingering on the periphery, appeared to soften slightly. Though his expression remained sour, his shoes were ruined, there was a subtle alteration in his stance, a glimmer of something resembling remorse. Perhaps, Gus mused, even Mr. Grumbles harbored a buried conscience. A community united. The aroma of barbecue, a brazen declaration of festivity, swirled in the air, thumbing its nose at Mr. Grumbles' previous complaints about offensive olfactory offenses. Patchwork quilts sprawled across the freshly laid ramp, laden with the vibrant colors of summer salads, juicy melon slices, and enough deviled eggs for a regiment. Laughter echoed, a joyous chorus banishing the HOA's lingering disapproval. Gus, balancing on a lawn chair near the edge, observed the scene, his nose twitching. A lingering unease remained. Although silent since the chainsaw debacle, Mr. Grumbles' disapproval could sour cream. Yet, Mary radiated joy as she navigated the ramp with fluid grace, pausing to admire Mrs. Higgins's celebrated petunias. Bob, arm draped around Mary's shoulder, looked a decade younger. Not bad, Gus? Bob chuckled, nudging him gently. Didn't think we'd manage this, did you? Gus responded with a lick, a silent affirmation resonating within him. The community's swift response astonished him. Mrs. Rodriguez, famed for her salsa, orchestrated the picnic. Mr. Chin, typically tethered to his computer, dedicated his morning to draping the ramp's railing with twinkling lights. Even aloof teenagers had pitched in, setting tables and hauling chairs. He spotted Mr. Grumbles rigid at the periphery, arms crossed, his face a stony fortress. He resembled a grotesque sentinel guarding the gates of, well, discontent. A solitary hot dog sat forlornly on his paper plate. Sensing the undercurrent, Mary wheeled toward Mr. Grumbles, her smile unwavering. Bartholomew, she greeted him warmly. We're so glad you joined us. Come partake. There's plenty for everyone. Mr. Grumbles hesitated, his eyes flitting nervously around the ramp. I merely wish to observe. Observe the happiness, Mary responded softly. Observe the fellowship. Observe the difference a simple ramp can make. She indicated a group of children playing hopscotch on the smooth surface. Come on. Sample Mrs. Rodriguez's salsa. It's heavenly. Slowly, reluctantly, Mr. Grumbles edged closer. He nibbled tentatively at his hot dog, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Then, almost as if a dam broke, he visibly relaxed. He took another bite, and then, in a decisive gesture, he deposited his plate on a nearby table and reached for the salsa. Gus watched, his tail emitting a tentative thump against the ground. He noted Mrs. Rodriguez engaging Mr. Grumbles in animated conversation, her expressive gestures eliciting the ghost of a smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, the old curmudgeon was yielding. As the sun began its descent, painting the ramp with long, stretching shadows, Mary addressed the gathering. I want to express my profound gratitude, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for your unwavering support, your boundless kindness, and your collective will to champion what's just. This ramp transcends mere construction. It embodies our community spirit, our dedication to one another. None of this would have materialized without each and every one of you. The applause erupted, a thunderous ovation to the unifying force of shared purpose. Gus, nestled safely between Bob and Mary, felt a wave of serene warmth wash over him. The knot in his stomach dissolved, replaced by a sense of tranquil contentment. He glanced towards Mr. Grumbles, now chuckling at something Mrs. Higgins had recounted about her feline companion. Maybe, just maybe, the world had brightened, had softened, had become a little more inclusive. Still, despite Mr. Grumbles' apparent acceptance, Bob remained vigilant, his unease perceptible. Gus sensed that Bob understood this celebration marked the end of one battle but not the war. Gus licked his chops, prepared to defend his loved ones.